At 12:02 and 47 p.m., Vivian Mercer walked out of the Cook County Courthouse with a folded copy of her divorce judgment in her leather bag, and the strange sensation that everyone on the sidewalk knew she had just stopped being someone's wife. Nobody looked at her twice. Chicago moved around her with its usual indifference, taxis slipping between buses, office workers carrying paper cups through the August heat, a delivery cyclist swearing at a turning sedan, and somewhere above the street, the elevated train grinding its way toward the loop. Graham Hale was already gone. 3 hours earlier, he had stood beside her before the judge, wearing the navy suit she had chosen for him 6 years ago, and signed his name without looking at her. Now he was driving north with another woman. Vivian knew because Graham had not bothered to hide it. "You're really going straight back to the office?" he had asked outside the courtroom. "Where else would I go?" she replied. Graham had given a small, almost embarrassed smile. "You could go home." Vivian looked at him for a long moment. "Which home?" He had no answer. That silence had been more honest than anything he had said during the last year. At 1:16 p.m., Graham pulled his black Range Rover into the driveway of a glass-and-stone house overlooking Lake Michigan. Sienna Cole sat beside him, sunglasses pushed into her hair, one hand resting lightly on his wrist, as though she had already earned the right to touch him there. "This is it," the realtor said, opening the front door. 4 bedrooms, private dock access, heated floors, and the master suite faces the lake. Sienna stepped inside and slowly turned around. "Graham," she whispered. "I could live here." He smiled. "That's the idea." She laughed softly. "You promised me something with a view. I promised you more than that." "How much more?" Graham looked toward the windows. "Everything changes now." Sienna moved closer. "You're divorced." "Yes." "For real?" He almost laughed. "For real." She kissed his cheek. "Then we're finally free." Graham believed her. That was the tragedy of it. He believed that freedom was simply the moment another woman stopped being forbidden. Across the city, Vivian sat alone in her office at Mercer Hale Advisory, though the name on the frosted glass would soon have to change. Her assistant, Nora Bennett, placed a coffee beside her. "You haven't touched anything since you came back." "I don't feel hungry." "That's not what I meant." Vivian looked up. Nora hesitated. "Do you want me to cancel the afternoon meetings?" "No, Vivian." "Nora, if I cancel every meeting because my marriage ended, I'll have to cancel half my life." Nora lowered her voice. "I'm sorry." Vivian smiled faintly. "So am I." She opened her laptop. 12 unread messages appeared. Most were from clients. One was from Graham's attorney. Another was from the trust administrator. Vivian nearly deleted it. Then she noticed the attachment. "What is this?" Nora asked. "Nothing." Vivian clicked the file. It was a transaction ledger from Hale Family Holdings. Her eyes moved down the page. One transfer. Then another, then a third. All routed through a consulting company called North Star Meridian LLC. Vivian knew the name. She had seen it 2 months earlier and dismissed it as an ordinary vendor. But the recipient account was different this time. Sienna Cole. "Nora." "Yes?" "Lock my door." Nora stared at her. "Why?" "Because I need 10 minutes where nobody interrupts me." The door clicked shut. Vivian opened the transaction history again. $85,000, $120,000, $60,000. Not enormous by Hale family standards, but too consistent to be accidental. She searched Sienna's name. Then North Star Meridian. Her pulse changed. "No," she whispered. The company had been incorporated 9 months earlier. Its registered address was a virtual office in Delaware. Its listed manager was a man Vivian had never heard of. But one document contained a familiar signature. Graham's. Vivian leaned back slowly. For months, she had wondered whether the affair had begun because Graham was unhappy with her. Whether she had become too serious, too tired, too consumed by work. Whether Sienna had simply appeared at the right moment and offered him something Vivian no longer knew how to give. But the numbers suggested something uglier. Her phone rang. "Graham." Vivian watched his name glow on the screen. She answered. "Hello. Where are you?" His voice was tense. "At work." "You froze an account." Vivian's fingers tightened around the phone. Whose? Sienna's. A pause. How did you know? Because her card was declined. Vivian closed her eyes. 3 hours after their divorce, Graham was already calling her about another woman's money. Graham, she said quietly, did you know about North Star Meridian? Silence. What are you talking about? The company receiving money from Hale Family Holdings. Vivian, this isn't the time. When is the time? You're angry. I'm not angry. She looked at the transaction ledger again. I'm trying to understand why your girlfriend has received hundreds of thousands of dollars through a company nobody in your finance department seems to know. Stop calling her my girlfriend. Vivian almost laughed. What should I call her? Sienna is going to be my partner, then she should probably have a bank account that can survive one afternoon. Graham's voice hardened. Did you do this to hurt her? Vivian looked through the glass wall of her office. Below, Chicago continued moving as if nothing had happened. No. Then undo it. I can't. You can. Graham, I didn't freeze her money because you divorced me. Her voice became quieter. I froze it because I think someone has been stealing from the family trust. Another silence. This one was different. What did you say? Vivian stared at his name on the screen. Come back to the office. I'm not coming back. Then listen carefully. She opened the final document attached to the ledger. It contained a signature authorization dated 3 months earlier. Graham's signature was beneath it, and beside his signature was a handwritten note in Sienna's unmistakable handwriting. Vivian read it once. Then twice. Graham, she said, you need to ask Sienna where the money came from. Why? Vivian swallowed. Because I don't think you're the only person she lied to. The line went silent. And for the first time, since the divorce was finalized, Vivian felt something other than grief. She felt the cold, precise beginning of a truth that could destroy all 3 of them. At 2:08 p.m., Graham was standing in the kitchen of the lakefront house while Sienna ran her fingertips across a slab of white marble as though she had already begun arranging her life on it. The realtor, a polished woman named Caroline Brooks, smiled from across the room. The previous owners renovated everything last year, she said. The appliances are integrated, the cabinetry is custom, and the windows are treated for UV protection. Sienna barely listened. She was staring at the lake. Graham, look at that. He walked toward her. Beautiful, no. She shook her head. Not beautiful. Ours. Graham smiled, though something inside him resisted the word. We haven't bought it yet. But we're going to. She turned toward him. You said we were. I said we'd look. You don't bring me to a house like this just to look. Caroline laughed politely, sensing the tension beneath their conversation. The owners are motivated. If you want to make an offer today, I can have the paperwork prepared before 5. Sienna looked at Graham. See? Her eyes were bright. It's a sign. Graham should have felt happy. Instead, Vivian's voice returned to him. Ask Sienna where the money came from. He pushed the thought away. Let's finish the tour. Upstairs, Sienna opened the master bedroom door and stood beneath a chandelier reflected in the mirrored wall. I want this room. Graham leaned against the doorway. You can have it. You say that like it's easy. It is. Because you're rich? She smiled. Or because you finally stopped letting your ex-wife control everything? Graham's expression changed. Don't start. I'm not starting anything. She walked toward him. I'm just saying, Vivian made everything complicated. Vivian isn't part of this anymore. Sienna watched him carefully. Then prove it. Downstairs, Caroline's phone buzzed. Excuse me. She stepped away. Sienna lowered her voice. Did she freeze the account? Graham nodded. For now. How much? I don't know. You don't know? Sienna, I told you I'd handle it. Graham, that was money I needed. For what? She stared at him. For the house. He frowned. You were going to use that money? Of course. Without telling me? I thought you knew. Knew what? Her confidence flickered. Nothing. Graham moved closer. What were you going to use it for? Why are you interrogating me? Because my ex-wife just told me she thinks someone stole money from the family trust. Sienna went still. She said that? Yes. And you believed her? I didn't say that. But you're asking me questions. Because you're the person whose account was frozen. Sienna looked away. This is unbelievable. Sienna. No. You don't get to look at me like I'm the problem. Then tell me the truth. Her eyes returned to his. I love you. That's not an answer. It is when you're asking me whether I'm loyal to you. Graham said nothing. For several seconds, neither did she. Then Sienna picked up her purse. Let's leave. We haven't finished. I don't want the house anymore. That was the first lie she told that afternoon. She wanted it desperately. But she had suddenly understood that the house was no longer a symbol of victory. It was evidence of expectation. 3 floors of glass, stone, and lake light had become a question neither of them could answer. At 2:31 p.m., Vivian was sitting in the conference room of Hale Family Holdings with 2 trust attorneys and a stack of documents she had not opened in years. You understand that the divorce changes her authority, Attorney Michael Reed said. But not immediately. Vivian looked at him. Explain. The trust predates your marriage. Your divorce judgment separates your marital property, but the trust has its own governance structure. And my position? You remain a co-trustee until the amended succession documents take effect. Vivian stared at the signature page. Her name was there. So was Graham's. Can he remove me? Not unilaterally. She leaned back. And if I hadn't been his wife? Michael gave her a tired smile. You'd still be sitting here. Vivian looked down at the papers. That distinction mattered more than she wanted to admit. For years, Graham had treated her role in the trust as an extension of being his wife. He had joked at dinner parties that Vivian was the person who makes sure I don't spend all the money. She had smiled because it was easier than explaining the truth. She had been the one reviewing the family structures, protecting assets from reckless investments, negotiating with banks, and preventing Graham's father from turning every disagreement into a legal war. She had not realized how much power that gave her until today. Michael slid another document toward her. There is something else. Vivian read it. Beneficiary restrictions? Yes. Sienna isn't listed. No. Then why is money going to her? Michael hesitated. That's what we're trying to determine. Vivian closed her eyes. How much? Approximately $420,000 over 9 months. She opened them again. 420,000. That we can trace. And the untraceable amount? Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. Vivian stood and walked toward the window. Chicago's skyline shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Somewhere across the city, Graham was probably sitting in that house, imagining a future with a woman whose bank account had just been frozen. Vivian should have felt satisfaction. Instead, she felt tired. If I walk away, she said, what happens? Michael answered carefully. The trust could be exposed to further transfers. And if I stay? You may have to testify. Vivian looked at him. Against Graham? Potentially. The word landed harder than she expected. She had spent 3 years trying to preserve Graham's family from internal disputes. She had protected his reputation when his father became ill. She had signed documents at midnight. She had sat beside Graham during his mother's funeral and held his hand while reporters waited outside. And now, 3 hours after their marriage ended, she was being asked whether she would help expose him. Her phone vibrated, a message from Graham. I'm coming to your office. Vivian stared at the words. Another message arrived. We need to talk face to face. Michael looked at her. Do you want me to stay? Vivian considered it. No. Are you sure? She nodded. If Graham is going to accuse me of destroying his life, he should at least have the courage to say it while looking at me. At 3:07 p.m., Graham walked into the office without knocking. He looked different from the man who had left the courthouse. The confidence was still there, but it had cracked around the edges. You froze her accounts, he said. Vivian remained seated. I placed a temporary hold on assets connected to the trust. You know exactly what you're doing. Yes. You're punishing me. No. Then why today? Vivian looked at him for several seconds. Because today is the first day I don't have to protect your feelings. His jaw tightened. You think this is about feelings? I think you believe everything is about you. Graham laughed bitterly. You were always like this. Like what? Cold. Vivian absorbed the word without flinching. And you were always better at making coldness sound like cruelty than asking why someone became cold. Graham looked away. For a moment, the room became painfully quiet. Then he said, Sienna didn't steal anything. Then she'll have nothing to fear from an investigation. Release the money. I can't. You can. No, I won't. Graham stepped closer. Vivian, the divorce is over. You don't get to control me anymore. She nodded slowly. You're right. She pushed the ledger across the desk. That's why this isn't about controlling you. Graham looked down. His face changed when he saw the transaction list. Where did you get this? From the trust records. You went through them today? I had every right. You're doing this because you're jealous. Vivian almost smiled. Graham, if I wanted to punish you, I would have called the press. He stared at her. I wouldn't. I know. She looked directly into his eyes. That's why you should be more worried. His phone vibrated. Graham glanced at the screen. It was Sienna, he answered. What? Her voice came through faintly. Graham, I need you to come back. He frowned. Why? The realtor called. About the house? The offer can't happen today. Why not? Sienna hesitated. Because the bank wants proof of funds. Graham closed his eyes. Vivian watched him silently. I'll call you back, he said. He ended the call and placed the phone on the desk. This isn't over. Vivian shook her head. No. Her voice was almost gentle. It isn't. Graham turned toward the door. You know what the worst part is? He asked without looking back. You still think you're the good person. Vivian looked at the frozen account notice on her screen. No, Graham, she paused. I just don't want to become the person you made me believe I was. He stood there for a moment, then walked away. Vivian waited until the door closed. Only then did she let herself breathe. Outside, somewhere beyond the glass towers and crowded streets, the lake stretched toward a horizon neither of them could see. And inside a beautiful house by that water, Sienna was learning that the future Graham had promised her could disappear before the keys ever touched her hand. By 4:12 p.m., the conference room at Hale Family Holdings had become the kind of place where nobody raised their voice because everyone was afraid of what might happen if they did. 3 attorneys sat on one side of the table, 2 forensic accountants sat on the other, and Vivian remained at the head with her hands folded over a thin folder bearing the trust seal. The emergency hold had been formally entered 26 minutes earlier. It covered the accounts, brokerage positions, and investment interests that could be traced to transfers originating from Hale Family Holdings and ultimately benefiting Sienna Cole. It did not touch Graham's personal salary, ordinary household expenses, or assets that could be established as independently acquired. Vivian had insisted on those limitations herself. You understand what this means? Graham asked from the doorway. Vivian looked up. Yes. You froze her assets. I placed a temporary hold on assets connected to the trust pending review. Stop hiding behind legal language. Graham walked into the room. His face was flushed, his tie loosened. You froze her money. Michael Reed closed his folder. Mr. Hale, the order is temporary and narrowly tailored. Graham turned toward him. I wasn't talking to you. Vivian stood. Graham. What? Sit down, he laughed. You still think you can tell me what to do? No. She gestured toward the chair. I'm asking because if you want answers, shouting will make it harder to hear them. For a moment, Graham seemed ready to leave. Then he pulled out the chair and sat. Vivian remained standing. The hold exists because there are multiple transfers from the family trust into an intermediary company, North Star Meridian LLC. Those funds were subsequently transferred into accounts controlled by Sienna. She was doing consulting work. For whom? For the company. Which company? Graham hesitated. North Star. Owned by whom? I don't know. Vivian looked at him. That's the problem. His hands clenched. You were always obsessed with paperwork. And you were always convinced paperwork was beneath you. This isn't about paperwork. Then tell me what it's about. Graham looked away. It's about you refusing to let go. Vivian felt something inside her become very still. I let go 3 hours ago. No, you didn't. I signed the judgment. You froze her accounts. Because I found evidence. You found an excuse. Michael quietly gathered his documents. Perhaps we should pause. Graham stood abruptly. No. I want her to say it. Vivian looked at him. Say what? That you're doing this because Sienna took me away from you. Vivian stared at him for several seconds. You really need that to be the explanation. What other explanation is there? That I am still responsible for protecting the trust. You're my ex-wife. Yes. You don't get to interfere with my life. I'm not interfering with your life. Vivian slid a document across the table. I'm investigating where the money went. Graham looked down. The first page showed a transfer of $85,000. The second showed $120,000. The third showed $60,000. These aren't payments to Sienna, he said. They're payments to Northstar. Look at the beneficial ownership section. Graham read it. His expression tightened. What? Read it. I am. His eyes moved slowly across the page. Sienna is the beneficiary. Vivian nodded, indirectly. She told me Northstar was a consulting firm. It is. Then what's wrong? The consulting contract was signed after the first payment. Graham looked up. That's impossible, exactly. He stood again. You're lying. No. You expect me to believe you over her? Vivian's voice softened. No. I expect you to believe the documents. Graham stared at her. His anger was beginning to lose its shape. It had been easier when Vivian was simply the bitter ex-wife trying to hurt him. Documents were harder to hate. Why didn't you tell me this before the divorce? He asked. Vivian's eyes lowered for a moment. Because I didn't know. You should have known. Perhaps. You always knew everything. No, Graham. She looked back at him. I knew how to protect your family. I didn't know how to protect myself from you. Silence settled over the room. Michael looked down. Even the accountant stopped typing. Graham swallowed. That's not fair. Neither was the divorce. He stared at her. I loved you. Vivian's expression barely changed. I know. Then why are you doing this? Because loving you didn't make me blind. Graham's phone began ringing. Sienna. He ignored it. It rang again. He rejected the call. A third time. He finally answered. What? Sienna's voice was sharp. Why can't I access my accounts? Graham closed his eyes. They're reviewing them. Who? Vivian. She can't do that. Apparently she can. Graham, you need to stop this. He glanced at Vivian. Stop what? You need to make her release the money. Why? Sienna went quiet. Because it's mine. Graham's eyes narrowed. How much? What? How much of the money is yours? All of it. That's not what I asked. Her breathing changed. Graham, I don't understand why you're questioning me. Because Vivian showed me the documents. Silence. What documents? Northstar. Nothing. Not even breathing. Graham's face went pale. Sienna? I have to go. Sienna. The line went dead. Graham slowly lowered the phone. Vivian watched him. That's the first time today you should have listened to me. Don't. I didn't say anything. You don't have to. He walked toward the window. She hung up. Yes. She never hangs up on me. Vivian looked down at her hands. People reveal themselves when the story they told stops protecting them. Graham turned. You think she lied to me? I think she may have lied to both of us. About what? I don't know yet. Then how can you say that? Because the records don't match the story. Graham stared at the city beyond the glass. What if you're wrong? Vivian answered immediately. Then the hold will be lifted. And what if you're right? She paused. Then you need to know before you lose more than money. He looked at her. What could I lose? Vivian's eyes held his. The person you thought you were becoming. Graham said nothing. At 6:03 p.m., the forensic accountants discovered another transfer. This one was different. $200,000 had moved from a Hale investment account into Northstar Meridian 48 hours before Graham filed for divorce. Vivian stared at the date. Who authorized this? She asked. One accountant turned his monitor toward her. The authorization code belongs to Mr. Hale. Graham, who had remained in the room, stepped closer. I didn't authorize that. Vivian looked at him. Are you sure? Yes. Then someone used your credentials. I would know. Would you? Graham's face tightened. What does that mean? Vivian pointed to the screen. The transaction was initiated from your office computer. He shook his head. Impossible. Who had access? Graham started to answer, then stopped. Vivian watched the realization arrive before he spoke. Sienna, he whispered. Vivian didn't react. She worked in your office. She had access to my calendar. And your computer? Sometimes. Your passwords? Graham looked away. She knew some of them. The room went silent. Why? Vivian asked. Because I trusted her. Vivian nodded slowly. That's the difference between us. Graham looked at her. What? You trusted her because she made you feel wanted. She closed the folder. I trusted you because I believed you would never make me regret it. Graham's eyes reddened, but he refused to look away. Vivian. What? If this is true, he couldn't finish. Vivian completed the sentence for him. Then, your divorce may have been the least expensive consequence of your choices. He looked at her as if he had finally realized that the woman he had spent months calling cold was not standing there to punish him. She was standing there because she had been forced to become the last barrier between his recklessness and the destruction of everything he had inherited. Outside, evening settled over Chicago. The first lights appeared along the river, one by one, while the city continued pretending that money could buy certainty. But inside the conference room, Graham Hale was beginning to understand that the woman he had chosen over Vivian might never have loved him for the reason he thought she did. And Vivian, despite everything, could not decide whether discovering the truth would finally free her from Graham or bind her to the consequences of his choices for much longer than either of them expected. By 7 the next morning, Graham had convinced himself that Vivian was wrong. He sat alone in the kitchen of his River North apartment, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold while the city outside his windows slowly brightened beneath a pale August sky. His phone lay beside the cup. Sienna had sent 11 messages since midnight. The first had been affectionate. The next 3 had been angry. The remaining 7 had become increasingly desperate. Call me. Graham, please. You need to fix this. She is trying to destroy everything. He read the last message again. If you love me, you'll stop her. Graham locked the phone. Of course I love you, he whispered, though nobody was there to hear him. He needed the sentence to remain true because the alternative was too humiliating to consider. If Vivian was right, then his divorce had not been the beginning of a new life. It had been the final act of a deception he had helped create. He dressed and drove to Sienna's apartment in the West Loop. When she opened the door, she was wearing a cream sweater and no makeup. For a second, she looked younger than he remembered. Vulnerable. Almost frightened. You came, we need to talk. She stepped aside. I knew you would. Graham entered. Her apartment was immaculate. Flowers stood on the dining table, a designer handbag rested on a chair, and architectural magazines were spread across the coffee table. One of them showed a lakefront house almost identical to the one they had toured. You still want the house? Graham asked. Sienna looked at him. Why wouldn't I? Because the money is frozen. You can fix that. Maybe. Graham. She moved closer. You said you were going to give me a life. I am. Then act like it. He studied her face. What did you know about North Star? Her expression changed so quickly that he almost missed it. Nothing. Vivian found documents. Vivian has been trying to scare you. Did you know money was being transferred through it? No. Did you know the company was registered 9 months ago? No. Did you know you were listed as the beneficial recipient? Sienna crossed her arms. I told you. I didn't know. Graham nodded, but something in him had begun to resist the answer. Then why did you tell me the money was yours? Because it was supposed to be mine. That's different. Not really, it is to me. Sienna walked toward the kitchen. You're interrogating me like Vivian. I'm asking questions. Because she put doubts in your head. No. He followed her, because the documents don't make sense. She opened a cabinet. Do you want coffee? Sienna. You haven't slept. Neither have you. Exactly. So, let's stop fighting. She turned around. This is what Vivian wants. Graham stared at her. What does she want? You miserable. The answer came too quickly. She wants you to come crawling back. Graham said nothing. Sienna stepped closer. She can't stand that you chose me. Did I? Sienna froze. What? Graham immediately regretted the question. Nothing. No. Say it. I said I chose you. You didn't sound like it, Sienna, I'm trying to understand what happened. Her eyes filled with tears. You don't trust me. I want to. That's not the same thing. She turned away. Maybe you should go. Graham remained where he was. Why won't you explain North Star? Because I don't know anything about it. Then why are you afraid? Sienna looked over her shoulder. I'm not, but she was. And Graham finally saw it. At 10:15 a.m., the forensic accountants uncovered a second inconsistency. North Star Meridian had reported consulting revenue of $510,000, yet no corresponding client contracts could be found. Its expenses were unusually low, and nearly 60% of the money had eventually moved into accounts held by entities connected to Sienna's family. Vivian read the report twice. Her family? Michael asked. Her brother's construction company, the accountant replied. Daniel Cole owns a company in Indiana. Vivian looked at the records. Any relationship to Hale Holdings? None officially. Unofficially? The accountant hesitated. We found 3 invoices. Vivian looked up. For what? Renovation work. On which properties? He slid the documents across the table. Vivian's eyes narrowed. The invoices were for 3 Hale-owned properties, all work that had been authorized through Graham's office. She picked up her phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. What? Where are you? With Sienna. Vivian paused. You need to see something. I'm done listening to you. Then listen to the evidence. What now? Northstar paid your ex-girlfriend's brother more than $200,000. Silence. For what? Renovation contracts on Hale properties. That's impossible. You said that yesterday. Because it is. Then come to my office. No. Graham. I don't want your help. Vivian's voice became quieter. This isn't help anymore. He frowned. What does that mean? It means I'm giving you a chance to see the truth before someone else does. He hung up. Sienna watched him from across the room. Was that her? Yes. What did she want? Graham looked at her. She says North Star paid your brother. Sienna's face went blank. My brother? For renovation work. She's lying. Are you sure? Of course. Then call your brother. Sienna's fingers tightened around her phone. Why? Because if Vivian is lying, he'll tell you. Graham. Call him. She stared at him. You don't understand. Then help me understand. It's complicated. What is? She looked away. My brother needed money. Graham felt a chill move through him. How much? I don't know. You just said he needed money. He told me that. When? Months ago. And you never told me? Sienna's voice became defensive. Why would I? It was family. Because the money came from my family. She shook her head. It wasn't stolen. Then what was it? A favor. A favor? Graham laughed once, without humor. My family's money isn't a favor. Sienna's eyes hardened. You have no idea what my family has been through. Then tell me. You wouldn't understand. Try me. She walked to the window. My brother's company was failing. He had employees. Families depended on him. I asked someone for help. Graham stared at her. Who? She didn't answer. Who? Sienna. A person I knew. Who? She turned. Graham, why does this matter so much to you? Because I may have been the person who authorized it without knowing what I was authorizing. You didn't. Then who did? She said nothing. That silence was becoming an answer. Graham stepped backward. Did you use my credentials? Sienna's eyes filled with tears. I was trying to protect my family. Did you? Graham, did you use my credentials? I didn't think it would hurt anyone. He stared at her. That's not what I asked. She closed her eyes. Yes. The room seemed to contract around him. How many times? I don't know. How many? 3. Graham looked at the lakefront property brochure lying on the table. Yesterday, he had believed the house represented freedom. Today, it looked like a monument to a lie. You told me you had nothing to do with the money. I didn't take it for myself. You used my credentials. Because you would have said no, exactly. She looked at him. And I knew you'd say no because Vivian had taught you to be careful. He flinched at the mention of her name. Don't bring Vivian into this. But she was always between us. Sienna's voice cracked. Every time I asked you for something. You talked about rules, trusts, taxes, legal structures. She made you afraid to live. Graham stared at her. For months, those words had sounded intoxicating. Now they sounded rehearsed. And you made me believe rules were the enemy. Sienna stepped toward him. I love you. Do you? Yes, then why did you lie? She cried silently. Because I was afraid you would leave. Graham looked at her. He wanted to embrace her. He wanted to believe her. He wanted the story they had built to still exist. But the house, the money, the secret accounts, and the borrowed credentials had begun to form a pattern. At noon, Graham returned to Vivian's office. She was standing by the window when he entered. You were right, he said. Vivian did not turn around. About what? She used my credentials. Vivian closed her eyes. How many times? 3. And her brother received money. Yes. Vivian turned. Did she tell you why? She said she was protecting her family. Vivian nodded slowly. That's probably true. Graham looked surprised. You believe her? I believe people can do terrible things for reasons they sincerely think are good. What am I supposed to do? Tell the truth. And lose her? Vivian's expression softened. You already lost something. What? The version of her you loved. Graham looked down. And the version of you I loved, Vivian added quietly, you lost long before today. Neither spoke. Outside, traffic moved along Wacker Drive, horns echoing between buildings. The city was loud, but the silence between them felt louder. Graham finally asked, if I had come back to you yesterday, would you have taken me? Vivian looked at him for a long time. Yesterday, I was still your wife. And today? Today, I'm the woman who has to tell you the truth. He nodded slowly. I don't know which hurts more. Vivian answered without hesitation. The truth usually does. As Graham walked away, Vivian returned to the documents. She knew the investigation had only begun. What frightened her was not what they had already discovered. It was the possibility that Sienna's lies had been designed to hide something much larger, and that Graham might have been closer to the center of it than even he realized. The house by Lake Michigan never became theirs. At 9:18 the next morning, Caroline Brooks sent Graham an email informing him that the sellers had withdrawn from negotiations after the bank refused to recognize the funds being used as proof of liquidity. The message was polite, almost apologetic, but Graham read it 3 times before forwarding it to Sienna. They're backing out, he wrote. Her response arrived almost immediately. Make them reconsider. He stared at the screen. I can't. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. You said you could fix this. Graham closed the laptop. I know, he whispered. For the first time, the sentence sounded less like a promise and more like an accusation. By Friday, the story had begun circulating through Chicago's private social circles. Nobody knew the whole truth, but people rarely needed the whole truth to become uncomfortable around someone. At a charity luncheon on Michigan Avenue, Graham noticed conversations stopping whenever he approached. One man shook his hand and released it too quickly. A woman who had once kissed Sienna's cheek at parties now greeted her with a distant smile and immediately turned towards someone else. Sienna noticed too. They're judging me, she whispered. Graham looked across the room. They're judging the situation. No. Her voice tightened. They're judging me. Sienna, everyone is nervous. Because of Vivian. Graham looked at her. Don't blame her for everything. Sienna stared at him. You're defending her now? I'm defending the truth. That's what she always wanted. He sighed. Not everything is about Vivian. Sienna's expression hardened. It is when you're still carrying her around in your head. Graham said nothing. The accusation hurt because part of it was true. He was carrying Vivian everywhere. Not as a woman he wanted back, at least not yet, but as a series of memories he had spent months deliberately ignoring. Vivian reminding him to read a contract before signing it. Vivian waiting outside the hospital when his father had surgery. Vivian quietly transferring money into a reserve account when Graham's first development project nearly collapsed. Vivian sitting beside him after his mother died, saying nothing because she understood that grief sometimes hated conversation. He had called all of that control. Now he was beginning to recognize it as protection. Meanwhile, Vivian had started learning how to live without looking over her shoulder. On Monday morning, she changed the name on her office door. The old lettering, Mercer Hale Advisory, was removed and replaced with something simpler, Mercer's Strategic Law. Nora stood beside her. It looks strange. Vivian smiled. Good. You really aren't going back? Back to what? To him. Vivian watched the new letters being mounted. No, Nora hesitated. Do you still love him? Vivian looked toward the window. That's not the same question. What is the question? Do I want the life I had with him? Nora waited. No, Vivian said. Then maybe that's enough. Her life was becoming quieter. She started eating lunch away from her desk. She took long walks along the river after work. On Sunday mornings, she went to a small bookstore in Lincoln Park where nobody knew her marriage had ended and nobody cared about the Hale family name. She bought books she didn't need and left with coffee she rarely finished. Freedom, she discovered, did not feel dramatic. It felt like silence. Graham, meanwhile, was discovering that silence could be frightening. His father called him into the Hale Holdings boardroom on Tuesday afternoon. Sit down, Richard Hale said. Graham sat. His father pushed a newspaper across the table. The article was vague, but the headline mentioned an internal financial investigation involving Hale assets. What is this? Richard asked. A review. Of what? Transfers. Whose transfers? Graham hesitated. Sienna's. Richard's face hardened. Who is Sienna? Graham looked at him. Someone I'm seeing. After Vivian? Yes. Richard leaned back. You divorced Vivian 3 days ago, I know. And now the company is dealing with unexplained transfers to your girlfriend's accounts? They're being investigated. By whom? Graham swallowed. Vivian. His father's expression changed. Vivian is still involved? As co-trustee? Richard looked down at the documents. Do you know how many times that woman saved this company? Graham didn't answer. 7, Richard said. I counted. Dad, when the Denver property failed, she renegotiated the financing. When your brother's company defaulted, she prevented the bank from taking the warehouse. When you nearly signed that acquisition without reading the liability clause, she stopped you. Graham stared at the table. She wasn't supposed to control everything. Richard shook his head. She wasn't controlling you. She was cleaning up after you. The words landed harder than Graham expected. You always favored her, no. Richard's voice softened. I trusted her. Graham looked up. More than me? His father didn't answer immediately. More than your judgment. Graham left the boardroom with his father's words following him down the hallway. That evening, he drove past Vivian's office. The lights were still on. He parked across the street and watched people leave. He did not go inside. He saw Vivian emerge at 8:41 p.m., carrying a folder and speaking with Nora. She laughed at something Nora said. It was a small laugh, unguarded. Graham had not heard that sound in months. He lowered his gaze. He suddenly remembered the last night before their separation. Vivian had sat across from him at the kitchen table. You're not here anymore, she had said. I'm right here. Your body is. What do you want me to say? Nothing. Then what? She had looked at him with exhausted eyes. I want you to notice that I've been trying to save something you're no longer interested in saving. He had called her dramatic. Now he understood she had been telling him the truth. His phone buzzed. Sienna, where are you? He looked through the windshield at Vivian. Coming home, he typed. Then he deleted it. He didn't know what home meant anymore. At 10:14 p.m., Sienna confronted him. You were with her. Graham looked up from the sofa. No. Don't lie to me. I wasn't with her. You drove past her office. He stared at her. How do you know? Sienna froze. I saw your location. Graham slowly stood. You track me? I was worried. You were monitoring me. Because you don't trust me anymore. You gave me a reason not to. Sienna's face crumpled. Everything I've done was because I loved you. That's not enough. She stared at him. You sound like Vivian. Maybe Vivian was right about some things. Sienna slapped the table with her palm. There it is. What? You're becoming her. Graham shook his head. No. I'm becoming someone who asks questions, and what happens when you don't like the answers? He looked at her. Then I live with them. The sentence silenced her. 3 days later, the bank formally withdrew from the lakefront purchase. The realtor returned the deposit that had been held in escrow, and the dream disappeared without a dramatic ending. There was no shouting, no slammed door. Just an email, a returned wire, and a sentence from Caroline. "We regret that the transaction could not proceed." Sienna read it twice. "This is Vivian's fault." Graham looked at her. "No. Then whose?" He took a long breath. "Mine." She stared at him. "What?" "I should have known where the money was coming from." "You trusted me." "I did." "Then why are you blaming yourself?" "Because trust doesn't remove responsibility." Sienna looked away. Graham watched her and realized something painful. He had spent months believing Vivian was the obstacle between him and happiness. But Vivian had never stood between them. She had simply refused to pretend that consequences did not exist. That night, Graham opened an old storage box in his apartment. Inside was a photograph from their first year of marriage. Vivian was laughing beside him at a small restaurant in Boston. She was wearing a red scarf, and Graham remembered that evening clearly. They had been broke, ambitious, and happy. He had promised her that they would never become like the couples they knew, people who stayed together because leaving was inconvenient. He sat on the floor, holding the photograph. "I kept my promise," he whispered bitterly. "I just became the person I promised not to become." Across the city, Vivian stood on her balcony with a glass of water, watching the lights over the river. She did not know Graham was thinking about her. She did not need to. For the first time in years, her peace no longer depended on whether he remembered what he had lost. But somewhere inside Graham, the distance between them had begun to change. It was no longer the distance created by a divorce. It was the distance between the man he had been and the man he was finally forced to see in the mirror. The truth arrived on a Tuesday morning in an email that Graham almost deleted. The subject line was simple: internal findings. North Star Meridian. He opened it while sitting alone in his office, expecting another request from the forensic accountants. Instead, the first paragraph made his stomach tighten. "Our review indicates that certain transfers were initiated through an internal authorization process that was deliberately structured to appear as legitimate vendor payments." Graham read the sentence twice. Then, he scrolled. The next page contained transaction dates, approval codes, account numbers, and internal communications. At the bottom of the third page was a name he recognized. Daniel Cole. Sienna's brother. Graham leaned back in his chair. "No," he whispered. The report showed that Daniel's company had been used as an intermediary in a property renovation project that never fully occurred. Materials had been billed, labor had been invoiced, and funds had been released. But several subcontractors had never been paid. The money had simply moved again. From Daniel's company to North Star. From North Star to Sienna. And from Sienna into accounts that had no obvious connection to the renovation work. Graham's phone rang. It was Michael Reed. "Did you receive the report?" "Yes." "You need to come in." "Why?" "Because there is something in the supplemental file you should see in person." Graham's pulse quickened. "What?" "A message from Sienna." He stood. "What message?" "She sent it to your assistant 4 months ago." Graham stopped moving. "Why would she send something to my assistant?" "Because she couldn't reach you." "What did it say?" Michael paused. "She said the restrictions on her accounts were caused by Vivian." Graham closed his eyes. He remembered that day. Sienna had told him Vivian was deliberately blocking her access to money. She had cried in his car. She had said Vivian was jealous and wanted to humiliate her. Graham had believed every word. "Send it to me." "Come here, Michael." "Graham, there are legal implications." "Send it." The file arrived 30 seconds later. It contained an email from Sienna to Graham's executive assistant. "Vivian has blocked the transfer again. Graham needs to know that she is doing this personally. She told me I would never have access to Hale money as long as she remained involved." Graham stared at the screen. His throat tightened. He remembered Vivian telling him the exact opposite. "I am not interfering with your life. I'm investigating where the money went." He had accused her of revenge. He had defended Sienna. He had walked out of Vivian's office, believing himself morally superior. Now he saw the date of Sienna's email. It had been sent 2 days after a transfer she had already received. The restriction had not come from Vivian. It had been triggered automatically because the trust's compliance system detected an irregular payment. Vivian had not blocked anything. She had simply discovered what the system had already flagged. Graham drove to Sienna's apartment without calling. She opened the door wearing a silk robe, surprise flashing across her face. "Graham? We need to talk." She stepped aside. "What's wrong?" "You told me Vivian blocked your money." Her face changed. "She did." "No." He held up his phone. "She didn't." Sienna glanced at the screen. "Where did you get that?" "From the investigation." "You went through my records?" "Your records were already being investigated." "This is private." Graham laughed once. "You used my credentials." I explained why. "You lied about Vivian." "I was scared." "You told me she was trying to destroy us." "She was." "No." His voice cracked. "She wasn't." Sienna stepped backward. "Graham, you knew the system had flagged the transfers." "I knew there were questions." "And you let me believe Vivian was responsible because she hated me." "That doesn't answer the question." "I was trying to protect what we had." Graham stared at her. "What did we have?" She looked wounded. "Don't say that." "What did we have, Sienna?" "Love." "Love doesn't need stolen credentials." "I never stole anything." "You took money." "Money that was promised." "By whom?" Silence. Graham stepped closer. "Who promised it? Your father." "My father?" "Not directly." "Who, then?" Sienna looked toward the window. "Someone who worked for him." Graham's face hardened. "Who?" She whispered a name. Graham felt the floor shift beneath him. It was a senior executive who had been dismissed 6 months earlier for financial irregularities. "He told me the family trust was going to pay me for consulting," Sienna said. "I didn't know the money was coming through North Star." Graham looked at her. "You knew enough to spend it." She began crying. "I needed it." "You needed it so badly that you let me think Vivian was hurting you." "I was afraid you'd leave." "And now?" Sienna looked at him. "Are you leaving?" Graham did not answer. She walked toward him. "Graham, please." He stepped back. "Don't. I love you." "You keep saying that as though it makes everything else disappear." "What do you want me to say?" "The truth." She looked at him for a long time. "I wanted your life." Graham's face went still. "What?" "Your house. Your family. Your connections. The way people looked at you." She wiped her tears. "I wanted to know what it felt like to never worry about money again." Graham stared at her. "And me? I wanted you too." "Which came first?" She couldn't answer. That silence was the answer. Graham turned toward the door. "Graham." He stopped. "You were the only person who made me feel like I could become someone else." He looked back. "You didn't make me someone else." His voice was quiet. "You made me someone I don't recognize." He left. In the parking garage, Graham sat in his car for 20 minutes without starting the engine. He thought about Vivian. Not the woman who had stood across from him in a courtroom. Not the woman he had called cold. He remembered the woman who used to leave handwritten notes inside his lunch bag before important meetings. "Don't sign anything when you're angry. Call me if the numbers don't make sense. Eat something before the board meeting." He had laughed at those notes. He had called them unnecessary. Now he understood that they had been small acts of love disguised as caution. His phone buzzed. Vivian. He stared at her name. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. Then he answered, "Hello. Graham?" Her voice sounded tired. "Yes. Michael said you saw the supplemental report." "I did. Are you all right?" The question almost broke him. "No." Silence. "Vivian." "Yes?" "I owe you an apology." She closed her eyes in her office. "You owe me several." "I know. What happened?" Sienna lied. Vivian didn't sound surprised. "I figured. She made me believe you were responsible for the restrictions." "I know." "How?" "Because she told me herself." Graham swallowed. "She admitted it?" "Not directly." Vivian paused. "People rarely confess the part that makes them look cruel. They confess the part that makes them look afraid." Graham leaned his head against the steering wheel. "I was cruel to you." Vivian said nothing. "I chose her." Still nothing. "I thought you were holding me back." Her voice finally came. "I know. I thought you didn't love me anymore." "I know." "How did you know?" Vivian looked toward the city. Because you stopped asking me to stay. Graham closed his eyes. I didn't know how to ask. You knew how to leave. He had no answer. After a long silence, he whispered, Did you ever stop loving me? Vivian's breath caught. She had expected many questions. Not that one. Graham, please. She looked down at the divorce judgment on her desk. Love doesn't disappear just because trust does. He began to cry. Quietly. Without the dignity he usually guarded so carefully. Vivian heard it through the phone. She wanted to comfort him. Every instinct built over 7 years told her to say something gentle. But she had learned that compassion did not require rescue. I'm sorry, he said. I know. Is there any chance? He stopped. Any chance of what? Nothing. Vivian waited. Say it. Graham wiped his eyes. That we could ever talk about us again. Vivian looked at the photograph on her desk. It was an old picture of them at a lake house before either of them had money. They were young, laughing, and completely unaware of how expensive betrayal could become. Not today, she said. Graham nodded even though she couldn't see him. I understand. Do you? I'm trying. When the call ended, Vivian remained still for a long time. She had won nothing. The assets were frozen. The investigation was moving forward. Sienna's deception was being exposed. Graham was finally facing the truth. Yet none of it restored what had been broken. That evening, Graham returned to the empty apartment and removed the photograph of Sienna from the mantel. He did not throw it away. He simply placed it in a drawer. Then he stood in the dark living room, surrounded by expensive furniture and a silence that felt more honest than any luxury he had ever owned. He finally understood the real loss. It was not the lake house. It was not the money. It was not Sienna. It was Vivian, the woman who had loved him when he had nothing to offer except ambition, the woman who had protected him when he didn't realize he needed protection, and the woman he had abandoned the moment someone else made irresponsibility feel like freedom. For the first time, Graham understood that regret was not the pain of losing someone. It was the knowledge that you had been given something precious, recognized its value only after destroying it, and could never again pretend you had not known better. 3 weeks after the investigation began, Chicago had slipped into September, and the first cool evenings had arrived with the smell of rain on concrete. Graham had stopped seeing Sienna. There had been no dramatic breakup, no final scene in a restaurant, no shattered glass or neighbors calling the police. Their relationship simply became impossible to defend. Her accounts remained under review. The house purchase was gone, and the social circle that had once treated her like Graham's glamorous new beginning had quietly stopped inviting her anywhere. She moved out of the apartment without telling him where she was going. Graham did not ask. He had learned that some questions were only attempts to delay acceptance. What remained was Vivian. Not physically. She had made certain of that, but her absence had become a presence in every room of his life. On a Thursday afternoon, he sent her a message. Could we meet? Not to ask for anything. I just need to tell you the truth. Vivian stared at the message for several minutes before replying. 1 hour, public place. They met at a quiet restaurant in Lincoln Park, one Vivian had always liked because the tables were far enough apart that strangers rarely overheard conversations. Graham arrived early. Vivian arrived exactly on time. She wore a charcoal coat and carried no handbag larger than necessary. She looked composed. He looked exhausted. Thank you for coming, he said. You said you needed to tell me something. I do. She sat across from him. Then tell me. Graham looked at the table. I didn't leave you because I stopped loving you. Vivian's expression did not change. I know. He looked up. You know? I suspected. Then why didn't you stop me? She held his gaze. Because I had spent too long trying to convince someone to choose me, he swallowed. I wanted to feel young again. She said nothing. With you, I was responsible for everything. The company. My father's expectations. The trust. The future. Our marriage. Even myself. He gave a bitter smile. You were always asking me to think ahead. Yes, Sienna never did. Vivian lowered her eyes. She made me feel admired. I know. She laughed at my stories. She made me feel interesting. You were interesting. He almost smiled. Not to myself anymore. Vivian looked out the window. What changed? She made irresponsibility feel like freedom. The words came slowly. I thought you were holding me back because you asked questions. I thought Sienna loved me because she never questioned anything. Vivian's voice was soft. And now? Now I understand that she wasn't asking me to be free. She was asking me not to look too closely. He took a breath. But I can't blame everything on her. Vivian looked at him. Good. I made the choice. Yes, I lied to you. Yes, I humiliated you. Her jaw tightened slightly. Yes. And I left you believing you weren't enough. Vivian looked down at her hands. That was the part that hurt most. Graham closed his eyes. I know. No, she said gently. You know now. He opened his eyes. She continued, at the time, you didn't know. That's what made it cruel. Graham nodded. You're right. The waiter approached. Neither wanted anything. After he left, Graham said, Do you remember the night you asked me if I still loved you? Yes, I did. Vivian looked at him. I loved you that night. Then why didn't you say it? Because saying it would have been another way of asking you to stay. He stared at her. You were protecting my choice. I was trying to protect what was left of my dignity. He looked down. I don't deserve you. Vivian shook her head. Don't say that. Why? Because it turns me into something I don't want to be. What? A prize you lost. He went silent. I am not the reward for your regret, Graham. The sentence landed quietly, but it left no room for argument. He looked toward the window. People walked past beneath umbrellas, couples sharing coffee, office workers checking phones, a mother pulling a child away from a puddle. Ordinary life. Life that continued, regardless of what had happened to them. I thought if I lost everything else, Graham said, I could at least come back to you. Vivian's eyes softened. That's not love. He looked at her. What is it? Fear. Fear of being alone? Fear of living with what you did. Graham leaned back. For the first time, he didn't defend himself. You're right. Vivian watched him. What are you going to do? Tell the truth. To whom? The board. My father. The investigators. Anyone who needs to know. And Sienna? I've already told her I won't protect her. Vivian nodded. That's probably the first honest thing you've done for her. He smiled sadly. You make everything sound simple. It isn't simple. You always seem calm. I'm not calm. He looked surprised. I'm tired. She paused. There's a difference. Graham studied her face. Are you happy? Vivian thought about it, sometimes. Are you happier without me? She didn't answer immediately. I am becoming myself again. His eyes lowered. That hurts. It should, he nodded. I deserve that. No. She leaned forward slightly. You deserve consequences. That's different from pain for its own sake. Graham looked at her with something close to admiration. You really are different. Vivian smiled faintly. No. I'm finally no longer trying to convince you that I am. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Graham reached into his coat and placed a small envelope on the table. Vivian looked at it. What's that? A letter. You could have emailed it. I wanted you to have something I wrote without expecting an answer. Vivian hesitated before taking it. I won't read it here. You don't have to read it at all. She put it inside her bag. Graham stood. I should go. Vivian nodded. Thank you for telling me the truth. He looked at her. Was there ever a chance? She understood what he meant. Not that afternoon. The years before it. The marriage. The moment before Sienna. The moment before the lie. There was a time, Vivian said quietly. There was a very long time. His eyes filled. And now? Vivian looked at him with compassion rather than anger. Now there is a life that happened after you chose to leave. He nodded. I understand. I hope you do. He walked away. Vivian remained seated until the door closed behind him. Only then did she open the envelope. The letter was 3 pages. Graham's handwriting was uneven, as though he had written and rewritten the same sentences until the words stopped sounding like excuses. I spent months telling myself I left because I was unhappy. That wasn't the truth. I left because being admired felt easier than being accountable. Vivian stopped reading. She looked out the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. She continued. You loved the man I could become. I loved the woman who believed I could become him. And when someone else offered me a version of myself that required nothing from me, I chose the easier version. She closed her eyes. The next sentence hurt most. You were never too cold. I was too immature to understand the difference between comfort and complacency. Vivian folded the letter. She did not cry. That surprised her. A year ago, she would have cried over words like these. Now they simply confirmed what she already knew. The truth could explain a wound without healing it. That evening, Graham stood alone on the balcony of his apartment. The city lights reflected on the wet streets below. He had once believed losing Vivian would be the worst thing that could happen to him. Now he understood that the worst thing had happened much earlier. He had possessed her love and treated it as permanent. He had mistaken patience for weakness, loyalty for obligation, and protection for control. The divorce had not taken Vivian away from him. His choices had. And no apology, however sincere, could reverse time. Across the city, Vivian closed her office door and switched off the lights. She placed Graham's letter in a drawer beside the old photograph of their marriage. She did not destroy either one. She simply stopped carrying them. That was the difference. She could remember without returning. She could forgive without reopening the door. And Graham, finally, was beginning to understand that sometimes the person you love does not leave because they stopped loving you. They leave because loving you became too expensive a price to pay for remaining themselves. By the middle of October, the investigation was finally coming to an end. The first cold wind had begun sweeping through Chicago, carrying the smell of wet leaves along the river, and the city had entered that brief season when everything seemed quieter without actually slowing down. At 9:40 on a Tuesday morning, Vivian sat in the same conference room where the emergency hold had been authorized nearly 2 months earlier. The documents before her were no longer accusations. They were conclusions. Michael Reed closed the final folder. The legitimate assets will be released by the end of the day. Vivian nodded. And the remaining funds? Subject to recovery proceedings. Against Sienna? Against the entities involved. Her brother as well. Vivian looked down at the report. What about Graham? Michael paused. He cooperated fully. Any criminal exposure? No. The evidence shows he was negligent and reckless, but not knowingly involved in the fraudulent transfers. Vivian exhaled. That's good. Michael studied her. You still care about him. Vivian gave a faint smile. Caring isn't the same as going back. No, he said, it isn't. At noon, Sienna received the official notice. Her frozen accounts would be partially released, but the funds connected to the fraudulent transactions remained subject to recovery. She had sold the car she bought with borrowed money. Her brother's company had entered restructuring. The people who once admired her on social media had stopped commenting on her photographs. Some had unfollowed her quietly. Others simply stopped answering messages. She was not destroyed. That would have been too easy. She was left with something more difficult, consequences that would continue long after people stopped talking about her. Graham met her once before the proceedings ended. They sat across from each other in a nearly empty cafe. Sienna looked tired. Are you happy? She asked. Graham considered the question. No. Because of me? Because of me. She looked away. I thought you loved me. I did. Then why did you leave? Because I was weak. She shook her head. That's not an answer. It is. He looked at her. I wanted someone who made me feel admired without asking me to become better. Her eyes filled with tears. And Vivian did? She asked me to become responsible. You always chose her. Graham shook his head. No. I chose against her. Sienna looked down. Is that different? It is now. She was quiet. Do you still love her? Graham did not answer immediately. I don't know if love is the right word anymore. Sienna looked relieved for half a second, then understood. Because she won't take you back. Because I don't want to turn her into the reward for my regret. Sienna looked at him. That's something she said. He nodded. She was right. Sienna smiled bitterly. She always was. Graham stood. I hope you rebuild your life. Do you hate me? He looked at her. No. You should. No. Hate would make this easier. He left her with the consequences neither of them could escape. That afternoon, Vivian signed the final release documents. When she put down the pen, her hand did not shake. Michael gathered the papers. It's over. Vivian looked at the empty chair across the table. The investigation is. And the rest? She smiled. The rest ended a long time ago. That evening, Graham came to her office one last time. He did not enter until she invited him. He stood near the door, hands in his coat pockets. I heard the assets were released. Most of them. Thank you. Vivian nodded. You're welcome. He looked around the office. The old name was gone from the glass. Her new company occupied the same space, but it felt entirely different. There were photographs of her friends on one wall, a certificate from a legal foundation on another, and a small plant sitting on the windowsill. No photograph of their marriage remained. You changed everything, he said. I changed what needed changing. He smiled faintly. I used to think you were afraid of change. I was afraid of unnecessary change. And I was unnecessary? Vivian looked at him. No, she paused. The version of our marriage we had become was. Graham nodded slowly. I wanted to ask you something. What? If there had been no Sienna, do you think we would still be together? Vivian looked toward the window. The question had no safe answer. I think we would have eventually had to face the same problems. Because of me? Because of both of us. Graham frowned. You? I buried myself in work. I thought being useful was the same as being emotionally present. I stopped telling you when I was lonely because I was afraid you'd hear it as criticism. You were lonely? She smiled sadly. For a long time. Graham lowered his head. Why didn't you tell me? I did. He looked up. When? In all the ways I thought you would understand. He closed his eyes. I didn't. No. She walked toward the window. But that's why I'm not going to rewrite our marriage into a story where one person was innocent and the other was evil. Graham stood beside her, leaving enough distance between them to make the separation visible. I hurt you. Yes. I still love you. Vivian looked at him. I believe you. He swallowed. That makes this harder. It should. He gave a small, broken laugh. You always know what to say. I didn't always. Maybe I didn't listen. You didn't. They stood in silence. Finally, Graham asked, could we ever be friends? Vivian smiled gently. Maybe someday. Hope appeared briefly in his eyes. But not now. It disappeared again. I understand. She turned toward him. Graham, I don't hate you. His eyes became wet. I know. And I don't want revenge. I know. The asset freeze wasn't revenge. I know that now. It was necessary. Yes. She looked at him carefully. But I also need to be honest with myself. About what? Part of me wanted you to feel powerless. Graham said nothing. Vivian continued. I was hurt. I wanted you to understand what it felt like when someone else controlled the future you thought was guaranteed. Did it work? She shook her head. Not the way I thought it would. Why, Moy? Because watching you lose things didn't give me back what I lost. Graham looked at her. What did you lose? Vivian answered quietly. The woman I was before I started measuring my worth by whether you chose me. He looked down. I'm sorry, I know. She smiled. That's enough. At 8:26 p.m., Graham left Vivian's office for the last time. He walked down the sidewalk without calling a car. The air was cold, and the streets reflected the city lights. He passed a restaurant where they had celebrated their 10th anniversary. He passed a bookstore where Vivian used to spend Saturday mornings. He passed the river where he had once promised her that nothing would ever come between them. He understood now that promises were not broken only by betrayal, they were broken slowly, through neglect, arrogance, and the repeated belief that tomorrow would always provide another chance. Vivian remained in her office after he left. She opened the window slightly and let the cold air in. Her phone buzzed with a message from Nora asking whether she wanted dinner. Vivian smiled and typed back, yes. She closed her laptop and looked once more at the empty chair where Graham had been sitting. There was no hatred in her anymore. That surprised her. For months, she had imagined freedom as the moment he finally understood what he had done. But freedom had arrived quietly. It was the ability to hear his apology without needing it. The ability to remember their marriage without wanting it back. The ability to know that she had once loved him deeply and still choose a life in which she did not have to disappear inside that love. The following spring, Vivian stood on a small balcony overlooking the Chicago River as sunlight broke through the clouds. Her firm had grown. She had new clients, new friendships, and a calendar filled with things she had chosen for herself. Graham had rebuilt his professional life slowly, accepting the consequences of his negligence and repairing relationships he had taken for granted. Sienna had moved away from Chicago. Her story had become old news. Nobody had won. That was the truth. There had been no perfect revenge, no triumphant return, no magical second chance. There had only been choices and consequences. Vivian thought about the day she had frozen Sienna's assets. At the time, she believed that was the moment she reclaimed control. Now she understood differently. Freezing the money had protected the trust. It had stopped a financial injustice from becoming larger. It had forced the truth into the light. But it had not freed her heart. That happened later, when she finally stopped waiting for Graham to understand her pain. She had once believed letting go meant admitting that the marriage had meant nothing. Now she knew the opposite was true. It had meant enough to hurt. Enough to teach her. Enough to change her. But not enough to own the rest of her life. Vivian turned from the balcony and picked up her coat. Her phone rang. It was Nora. Ready? Yes. Dinner? Dinner. Vivian smiled. She locked the office door and walked into the evening. Behind her was everything she had spent years trying to save. Ahead of her was a life that did not need saving. And somewhere in another part of the city, Graham was learning the same lesson from the opposite side of the loss. Sometimes the person you love does not leave because the love was false. They leave because you taught them, through your choices, that loving you would require them to abandon themselves. By the time you finally understand that, the person may still forgive you. They may even still love you. But forgiveness is not a doorway. Love is not a contract. And regret, no matter how sincere, cannot turn back a clock that was broken one choice at a time. It was too late for Graham. For Vivian, that was not tragedy anymore. It was freedom.